Monday on Astral Oracles. Thank you for being with me, everybody. In this video, I'm going to try to tie together some different major concepts that I have been dealing with, and it arises from a lot of circumstances in my life, but I've also been going through a lot of emotional purging, and not only on the personal level, but I've also felt like a lot of collective grief welling up, and so sort of having to shed some tears over just the atrocities that we've also committed as a species, and sort of all the hardships, the separation, the enslavement, and the sort of general lack of love and well-being that we have also tended to somehow put into the world often as a collective. And I think it speaks to what is being resolved at this moment, absolved, I'd almost say, because to me it seems, speaking in these weird apocalyptic terms, but kind of the energy of the personality of the Father that is essentially the Lord, the ruler, or the Dominus, as it's called in Latin, right? And so this idea of dominion that's age old, and that expresses itself on different levels of the human experience. So let's say on the political or the collective level, it manifests as empire. It's this weird tendency towards subjugation. And of course, the weird thing is that empire seems to translate. So from the Babylonians to the Assyrians to then the Neo-Babylonians, and then the Persians, and the Hellenistic empires, and the Rome Rome gets going, and a lot of stuff is happening in China, and Mesoamerica is a different story. But of course, in general, this weird kind of systemic structure that seems to proliferate and kind of move people in as objects and begin to use them for its purposes. And who's operating this if it's transgenerational? Well, it seems to be something that we're manifesting from the darkest parts of ourselves. So if we take these vibrational aspects seriously, the idea that, well, we can have any experience that we want to manifest, so whatever's in our experience is resonating with something within ourselves, right? So what part of me is it that wants to, or is in resonance with a world where there's, I don't know, 5 or 10 nuclear submarines sailing around the planet loaded with intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles, just so for mutual assured destruction, which we call the concept that we believe as sure world peace, which is of course interesting. Like, why would I choose to live in such a crazy world? And so I believe where it manifests on the physical level is as tension. What I notice working my body, doing body work, is that it's an interesting paradox that it's very easy for us to tense at will. So we couldn't function if I couldn't, move my hand like this. Essentially, I'm contracting certain muscles at will. But it's next to impossible to do the opposite, to resolve chronic tension at will. So I can't just turn off the chronic pain I have in the left side of my shoulder or whatever, being left-handed. Watch the mic. I can't turn that off at will. That's something that kind of requires me moving into an alignment with some kind of deeper, relaxing life force that's beyond my own will and control. And will and control is interesting, because then this is on the mental level, the idea of the ego, and the ego is essentially the interface that operates the world, the place where things come together, and hopefully it's adjusted. So it's linked in helpful ways to the more universal life flow that's constantly moving through it. But when it isn't operational, and we have different terms for this, but of course narcissism is one of them. It becomes vampiric. It becomes sort of a mechanism that seeks to extract, dominate, subjugate, and impose its own empty reality on life itself. So what I've been noticing in bodily patterns going through with Kundalini experiences, especially in my skull and face at the moment, is that it seems as if there is this deep pattern of tension that's egoic, and then the influx of energy is moving in around that, and it's actually trying to kind of annul it, or at least put it into a place where it isn't impeding the energy flow. And that's essentially why, traditionally you wouldn't awaken this kind of awakening experience without having a lot of preparation first. Because if you're just putting a lot of universal energy into to that tension pattern, that ego construct that's already there, then that can easily become overcharged and like develop a lot of different unfortunate symptoms that I've also myself been subject to. But the interesting thing I seem to be experiencing is now that it seems as if it's no longer really feeding on that energy flow. It's not being allowed to do so. So it is kind of shriveling or shrinking, and I think that corresponds to something in our collective experience. This kind of we're dying away of control of institutions, of dominion, essentially. And well, notice that there is a lot of things going on. So how to approach this? Partially, a way that this goes on. Well, this communication is a manifestation of it. So the information channels are no longer ordered from above. It's no longer sort of political institutions that are able to regulate cities, and there are like institutions like libraries, universities, stuff that then amass knowledge, and then to get to that knowledge you kind of have to align with that system. Instead, like, information is being generated all over by individuals and being transmitted into this web, as we correctly intuit that it is the World Wide Web, right? This weird type of interface structure where we are all transmitting and receiving units at the same time. And that's something highly interpersonal, something that's, of course, far more collective and partnership oriented, that dominate a model where, somebody is standing at the pew or the rostrum or the pulpit or wherever, and then telling people how they should think and believe. So that's a structure of domination that's dying away. Then I think sort of the thing that you really get it perhaps more interacting with American culture, but I think it's global, this sense of cognitive dissonance that people generally, on the ground, seem to, well, not believe the trappings of empire anymore, not necessarily believe this story that's being told from on high about how it's actually necessary to have all these kind of violent institutions and things that we've collectively ordered. And so a thing that I think is interesting is that you can almost historically see how this force needs to camouflage itself more. So if you, for instance, look at a thing like chattel slavery in the New World, then, well, that's scientific racism. Sort of the explanation that the reason that this is justified is because actually the people who are being enslaved are subhuman. Well, that arises after the naked brutality of what happens in the sugar plantations of the Caribbean, for instance, where people are deliberately being worked to death because it pays. So it's kind of this idea that we have to construct like these weird mental constructs that don't do anything but distract from reality, the more naked violence actually becomes, the more we are confronted with it. And so it's, if you look, for instance, at the British Empire, of course, we're speaking English right now, and it's interesting, that idea of British sophistication and the gentleman culture and all that, and I have a lot of good things to say about English in general, but of course we are also kind of dealing with an empire who came up with such wonderful classics as the concentration camp, or forcing opium addiction on the entire Chinese population just so they could get their tea and keep their trade empire going, or I don't know, terror bombarding people into submission, or the list is fairly long of kind of the atrocities that have been committed by people who at the same time are able to purport that, oh, they're actually kind of sophisticated. They're doing this because people need addressing. They kind of need to be ordered and essentially subjugated. And then if we look at the religious level, I think the idea of the Lord is strange, right? Because it's essentially, it's of course using directly the term for the person who owns the household, right? And so if you imagine kind of a Roman villa in, I don't know, the year 180 or something, where there's like all these slaves, and of course the people who terrorize them, run them, keep track of them, right? And then there is probably like this idea on the estate of the master, the Lord, like the dominus. He's somewhere out there doing something important, and that thing has to be more important than what I'm doing here now. And really, I should count myself lucky for being able to contribute to that. So if you look at Genesis, for instance, it's interesting, right? Because it's there is a weird type of sleight of hand going on, that is, well, you're free to look at this wonderful garden I've created for you. You're free to enjoy the splendor, except you're only actually free to only enjoy it the way that I've set out. You can enjoy it, which of course means that you're not essentially free. You're only free to act as pets in my orchestration of this divine creation. And I think that's where there's probably a very deep instinct of liberty, freedom within the human heart that's being violated, and that's very much awakening in the Aquarian age. And so, just to move this into the alien context, then what also came surfaced in a recent private session was kind of the Mantis agenda being explained, where the Mantis were explained as these, well, from a human perspective, sort of slightly cruel or heartless beings, but what they were aiming to achieve was essentially to move resources into, let's say, higher realizations, right? So it's kind of the idea that, well, never mind that people on the street are starving because we're going to the moon, so we have some rockets to finance. So never mind that people are going without grain because, like, there's some Pharaoh's tomb needs to be ready for the afterlife, like, and that's of course how a lot of human society culture has worked, just moving resources from people who had very little. The vast majority of human beings who were going without, and then moving it up to a small class of people who were then using these for often like weird, let's say, semi-superfluous purposes, it would seem. And that's a part of, let's say, this domination agenda. And what the Mantis are explaining, this idea that, well, it's also been necessary for us, like that weird thing that you can't really make an omelette without breaking a few eggs, right? And of course, if you're like a far left-wing apologist, like you probably point out like that the biggest head leaps in human productivity ever was achieved by the Soviet Union and by newly communist uh, China after the revolutions. But of course, it's also, you can't really realize a socialist utopia without killing a few tens of millions of people, and then it is this kind of weird evil influence, it would seem, at least to the individual human heart. Um, so I know this has become one of these elaborate, fairly complex talks that I sometimes give, but I also hope that it at least has served to illustrate how there are kind of forces within our own vibration, that the tension structures, the impulses for control that we also have in ourselves, but also inherit from a more cruel past somehow. And what we're moving into when we speak of these abundance experiences and all this, love and light and stuff, it is actually also the idea of realigning ourselves with a place where it's not necessary for some cruel master to constantly regulate us, to tell us off, to tell us that we're actually better off, and we also need to be civilized and punished for not living up to it. And so, of course, the deep emotional component of this coming around to it is shame. And I've been really thinking about, is shame essentially, it's not a personal emotion. Shame is sort of the weird ambient vibrational residue of lies. So shame is what arises when human beings aren't living in accord with themselves, that they're placing themselves somewhere else in the stories they tell than what's actually going on. And that's why it's interesting that shame is usually not an emotion that people, feel personally. That's more like guilt. It's rather like a hot potato that's being passed around, right? Um, and I think it's very interesting that it's an emotional component of lying. It's an emotional component of controlling people, of relating to them like objects or instrumentalizing them, that they kind of need to be shamed. They need to be put into this weird sub-altered, almost subhuman category. So a lot of reflections on that. And well, what kind of set this off for me was actually the weird geographical experience of being in America and seeing a lot of military bases in this weird, like, natural paradise in the middle of nowhere, like massive landing pads with attack helicopters and stuff, where you think like, who are they fighting? And weird aircraft in the horizon that doesn't behave like civilian aircraft. And like, there's at least one nuclear submarine just patrolling everything, uh, just to make sure that it can blow things up if things get blown up. So we're sure that everything gets blown up. So like this weird idea that I didn't notice that it seems collectively there's a lot of military presences in the most vital centers of the planet. So if you take, for instance, Hawaii, the big island, and friend Kevin also told that being on Oahu and out hiking, he also encountered like military chain link fences at the top of the summits there. So it's weird that Hawaii is also so militarized. Then, of course, Israel is heavily militarized. Kashmir and the Tibetan Plateau, heavily militarized areas, but all like very, very strong, energetic, forceful power centers in the gridwork of the planet. So to me, it's interesting what it is in our vibration, this kind of empire manifestation that kind of naturally attaches itself to the energy centers. And you could say tension, you would also experience it in the body, like tension is often most prevalent in the main energy chakra centers. But why it is that like we're collectively manifesting this, I think is interesting. So let's call in the Elohim and let's see what they have to say about it. Much love to you guys. From beyond 1,000 veils we speak to you. We are slowly lifting these components, rearranging them, and moving them into place. You could say we are reprogramming certain factors of reality to better fit into the alignment with which you are becoming oriented. So the orientation is there, but the alignment, let's say, the steady vibration is not quite there. This is what you're discerning in your reality. This is the weird presence between the sense of upgrades, the sense of emotional purging, the sense of opportune energies, manifestations of helpful physical experiences moving into your space. All these things seem to be created, and yet there is also a type of heaviness, a type of unconsciousness that sits in the hearts of human beings. And when you move into the felt space, the awakening of, well, let's call it integral, authentic, genuine presence, being with yourself, you will find that these obstructions are that much more clear. But why are these obstructions there? This individual is seeking more an answer on a collective level, we sense. He is asking about these military presences, this need to dominate, this idea of violence. Well, it wouldn't be much fun in the game without resistance. We hear objections from the individual channeling us. He doesn't like these platitudes of necessary opposition. He feels it's a type of circular answer, that everything negative can be explained away as a learning experience, as a type of opposition to be overcome. So rather, he would like to know what is the quality of grievance. Well, his grievance, we could say, is why is there grievance in the world? Why is it orchestrated in a way where you play around with heavy energies, with hurting each other, with violating each other, with subjugating things that will impede? Well, what we are trying to phrase here is that you try to impede the vital flow of life because this vital flow of life is in and of itself chaotic. There is an element of, let's call it, necessary violence to life. When you sublimate this, it becomes sacrifice. That is, it becomes willful destruction. And when you move into its rawest manifestation, it becomes sadism, blind dominion, exploitation, these elements. Therefore, know that what we are seeking to instruct you in is the willful use of force. It's the appropriate sense of control. This is what you term discipline in your language. And this is indeed what you would want to face, this overwhelm of emotion, this hostility of empire, this outside sense of dominion, these restrictions. You will face them with discipline, patience, tolerance. Notice that this is not the same as accommodation. This is not the same as understanding. This is not the same as unconditional love. There are certain, let's say, vibrational realities that cannot be banished, as you may think of it, by simply being met with its opposite. Rather, it needs to be seen, understood for its purpose. And so the purpose is this bounding off. It is this limitation. We could say that this limitation, it has grown into a type of collective callous. That is the strange thing, that individually you have all calloused over. You have grown heart and shell, so many of you, and those of you who haven't, have found it necessary to at least pretend to put up a brave face in order to feel like this cruel world wouldn't eat you alive. So it is indeed this discipline. Can you begin to sense the necessity of boundary? Can you begin to sense why it is that you feel threatened by these vital life forces? Because they do threaten to change. What they are always holding is the strong element of change. And so you may notice that all these places that our friend here, the individual, is asking about, they are related to great change. Geologically, you find on that island group a place that actually changes at a pace where you can observe it in human history. That is a very rapid pace of change for a geological formation. Well, in that place that was referred to as the Holy Land, that intersection between those three continents, you find that there is much change going on simply in the exchange of energies on so many different levels that it becomes a type of, let's say, historical convergence center that drives many episodes, actions, motivations to this day. Then you find in this plateau of which you speak a type of spiritual link, a type of ladder to heaven. You find that there is clear intuition to obstruct and obscure this. And that is, if human beings were to discover that they could freely move in and out of this reality as they wanted to, they would no longer be subject to empire, to subjugation. The game of fear, the game of punishment, the threats of intimidation, well, all these things would cease to have any bearing on the individual who can truly understand that they are actually moving in and out of reality from an eternal space. And so this is the secret that is gradually being revealed at this moment. The secret of your martyrs, of your sages, even of some of the Atlantean orders, and certainly of older orders still, that by attaining immortality, they became pure light projections in this life as in many others. And so unbreakable, untouchable by these reigns of empire, they emanate in and out of experience. They veil themselves and their consciousness as need be, and they reveal themselves to themselves as need be. And therefore you may also sense that certain inspirations are still alive for you. At certain times in your life, instructions may come for you to move in to these states of trust, of a type of bravery, knowing that there are other things driving your experience than immediate temporal concerns of safety, of protection, of pleasing your Lord, so to speak. Because, of course, the reason that you are still manifesting so many of these dominant energies is also because it has served you well to serve, so to speak. What are the rewards of servitude? Well, they are manifold. They are a lack of responsibility, a sense that catastrophes are being handled by someone else far away, that if you just follow orders, so to speak, if you keep to your little subset of reality and manage that, then you do not have to confront this great roaring storm of vital energy that indeed constitutes your innermost nature. And we could say also the outermost nature of reality, both the roaring voids of infinite creation, potential raw life force. You do not have to face that. As a servant, you have a purpose. As a servant, you have a connection. As a servant, you are ordered. As a servant, you are even wanted, we could say. at least for something, for the function that you bring to someone. And so notice that often what happens to these sages, these people who drop out of the incarnation configuration to drop into it again willfully, that there is a stage of complete disintegration within their experience. There is a movement outside of the world to then be a part of it again. And so notice that so many of you have been moving outside of the world. It has taken many shapes, many forms for you. There have been chapters also. There have been errands you have felt you needed to run somewhere else on the planet or somewhere else. There have been things pulling you out of your ordinary sphere. And now the ordinary sphere is becoming its own empire, its own boundaried territory, its own integrity. You are becoming more and more of sovereign units, and you are doing so by, let's call it, opened, empowered exchanges. As you become more sovereign in your choices, as you begin to then harvest indeed the rewards of mastery. And it is for all of you to become your own masters that this ascension process aims. That is to move into your purpose. The master has a purpose that is not determined from the outside, but that arises from within, with the voice of consciousness. This purpose is not determined. It is an open framework that you exist within. It is a sense of what feels right. It is the integral understanding of the integrity that surrounds you. For the master, there is the gift of humility, of knowing that you are part of a greater unfolding, that there is great things always to be understood that you have yet grasped, and there are great things that have been understood that you receive the benefits of by following after these insights. Then for the master, there is the assurance of meaning. There is this deep harvest of things that are alive on their own accord, that can be seen to grow wild. You will find that there is a signature within truth, that it allows itself to proliferate. It does not need to be sustained. It does not need to be necessarily ordered, but it can grow into its own template. It can expand into reality. It can tolerate all other things around it. It is of the forest rather than of the field. It is a part of a wild chaos that orders itself into a living symbiosis. And it is within this symbiotic sphere, with you constantly fusing within yourself, that all these limitations, that these dominions, these tensions are overcome, and that you see that all oppositions are provisional, that they are only set up for you to learn to become a greater unit of congruency, of togetherness, of harmonic construction. And with this, we feel we can leave you. We feel that we have delivered an inspirational message this day. We feel that we have activated within you the true purpose of the builders of the time-space. We align with you in this purpose, in our divine aspirations. We are all one as conscious, loving beings of this great omniverse. Therefore, we, the Elohim, we send you our deep blessings, our love from end to end, from lifetime to lifetime, from moment to moment. We are here sharing in the infinite, prosperous peace. I like their energy. I hope you took something helpful from that, guys. Much love to you.